The brain is one of the most important organs in the human body. Its structure is so complex that even science is barely scratching the surface of how it works. The brain is made up of soft neural tissues that control all the body's functions, but it also determines our personality, at least according to the current official state of science. There are many cases that show that trauma to the brain can change someone's personality. So the question is, can we live without a brain? By reading the comments under the various political posts on Facebook, the answer is clear to many: we can. But all joking aside, medical science has recorded many cases, both in the past and in the present, of people who have lived a lifetime, or decades in some cases, with almost no brain, or at least with a significant part of it missing. In some of these cases, even the people concerned were unaware of this deficiency. But not only humans may be able to live without this vital organ, there are also some thought-provoking cases in the animal world. Let's start with these. Mike the Headless Chicken. According to the story, on September 10, 1945, in Fruita, Colorado, farmer Lloyd Olson asked his mother-in-law to make him some chicken soup. They selected a chicken named Mike, but when they tried to decapitate him with a meat cleaver, they somehow missed the killing blow, leaving part of the brainstem intact. To the farmer's amazement, the animal survived and was even able to keep its balance after a while. Many believe that the chicken did not bleed to death because its carotid artery was not damaged, and the coagulated blood quickly blocked the damaged blood vessels. Word of the chicken quickly spread, and he traveled the country with Olson, and for 25 cents anyone could see the unfortunate animal. The interest was so great that the farmer earned $4,500 a month from the bizarre spectacle, which would otherwise be $45,000 to $50,000 at today's exchange rate. The animal was able to sit and walk for the rest of its life, although certainly it could no longer cluck. It was fed by putting small drops of water and pieces of grain down its throat. This was the eventual cause of its death on the 17th of March 1947, when one of the seeds lodged in its throat. The animal lived for a year and a half after being decapitated. It is quite amazing. Cockroaches without heads. Few people know, but cockroaches can live for up to 9 to 10 days without their heads. These insects, hated by everyone, do not die if they lose their heads because they retain their circulatory system and their special body structure allows them to continue breathing. They can walk, move around, and could probably live much longer than a few days if they didn't starve to death from lack of nutrition. The case of the laboratory rat R222. At Northeastern University, Professor Craig Ferris was examining the brains of very old rats in his lab one day when he discovered that one rather old rat could see, hear, smell, and feel like all the others, but was virtually brainless, and probably had been since birth. Subsequent tests found that the rat was suffering from hydrocephalus, so its brain was practically completely compressed and collapsed as it became increasingly full of fluid. Many of the functions that would normally be performed and controlled by the brain were transferred to areas not occupied by fluid. Ferris said that this ability, known as neuroplasticity, although widely documented, is a rare and extreme example. So much that when Ferris first looked at the brain scanner screen, he essentially saw an image of a rat without a brain. R222 was different from its peers in one respect. While other rats explored their surroundings with interest when they moved to a new place, R222 showed no interest at all. This is a common phenomenon among anxious animals, according to the professor. We'll get to the human cases in a moment, but first I'd like to remind you that you can subscribe to my channel if you want to be notified of my next videos. If you do, thank you very much. People without brains. Looking through the archives of medical science, we find many people with tiny brains or with huge chunks of brain missing, either because of some kind of congenital disorder or serious accidental injury. In a 2007 Lancet study, doctors described an incredible medical oddity. A 44-year-old civil servant lived a perfectly normal life despite having an incredibly small brain. This was discovered when the Frenchman was admitted to hospital after experiencing weakness in his left leg for 2 weeks. The doctors were really surprised when they found a huge chamber full of cerebrospinal fluid where the brain should have been, based on scans of his brain. The man's medical history showed that he was born as a hydrocephalic baby and had a shunt implanted in his head to help drain the fluid that had built up in his brain. When the man turned 14, the shunt was eventually removed because the boy complained of weakness and unsteadiness in his left leg. He then lived a normal life. He had a civil service job in a tax office, got married, and had 2 children. Tests showed that he had an IQ of 75, which, although below the average of 100, is not yet considered a mental disability. In another case, 12-year-old Trevor Judge Waltrip shocked the medical community. Trevor passed away in August 2014 after living his entire life without a brain and surviving until then virtually thanks to his brainstem. He was suffering from a rare disease called hydranencephaly, in which the cerebral hemispheres are completely filled with cerebrospinal fluid. People with this disease usually live for up to 12 weeks, making Trevor's case particularly remarkable. He was able to breathe and respond to stimuli independently, but was completely blind and unable to communicate verbally. He ate with the help of a feeding tube, and therapists stimulated his muscles and joints. Another much more fortunate case was reported in Science magazine in 1980. The article described the work of John Lorber, a professor of pediatrics at the University of Sheffield in England, who had carried out a number of studies on individuals with hydrocephalus. Dr. Lorber performed a CT scan on an unusually large-headed young man, which revealed that the cranial cavity was lined with a layer of brain tissue about 1 millimeter thick, with the remainder filled with cerebrospinal fluid. Of course, the brainstem, which is located at the bottom of the brain and connected to the spine, was normal, since it controls vital functions such as breathing, swallowing, digestion, eye movement, and heartbeat. You can't live without it. In the case of the young man studied by Lorber, the thin layer of brain cells was certainly adequate to provide the necessary brain power, as the student had an astonishingly high IQ of 126 and a first-class honors degree in mathematics. In 2014, another unusual case came to light when a 24-year-old Chinese woman was admitted to hospital complaining of dizziness and nausea. She told the doctors that she had problems walking steadily for most of her life, and her mother reported that she could not walk until the age of 7, and that her speech did not begin to develop until she was 6. Doctors carried out a CT scan and immediately identified the source of the problem. The entire cerebellum was missing. The space where it should have been was filled with cerebrospinal fluid. The cerebellum is located below the 2 hemispheres of the brain. It looks different from the rest of the brain because it is made up of much smaller and denser layers of tissue. It makes up about 10% of the total volume of the brain, but contains 50% of the brain's neurons. Otherwise, apart from walking unsteadily and having difficulty forming words, the woman was in surprisingly good condition. She married and gave birth to a girl who did not suffer from any similar disorder. The doctors believed that the cerebellum's functions were taken over by the cerebral cortex, so that she was able to live a more or less normal life. Doctors believed that whatever caused the cerebellum to be missing must have happened early in the woman's life, so her brain could have adapted to the condition. And the story of Noah Wall is almost a miracle. Born in October 2008, the boy was born with a rare disease called colpocephaly, a congenital disorder characterized by an underdeveloped cerebral cortex. This incredible disease affects only 1 in 7,500 newborns and causes severe physical and mental disabilities. The extraordinary problem was discovered before Noah was born, so everyone advised the parents to terminate the pregnancy because all the results showed that their baby had no brain, so Noah would never be able to learn to walk, talk, or take care of himself. Despite the frightening diagnosis, Noah's parents never gave up hope, and he was born with around 2% of the normal brain volume at the time. The The parents did everything they could to give him the best life possible and continued to hope for a miracle. And how right they did. Incredibly, by the time Noah turned 3 years old, his brain had reached 80% of its normal size. By the age of 6, he had learned to talk and later went to school. When he was born, doctors thought all this was completely impossible. The boy was later given a brace, although it is not clear to me whether he was able to walk with it unaided or only with the wheelchair he was often seen in. Either way, his progress is a miracle in itself. However, medical science has also recorded cases of perfectly healthy people who have suffered accidents that have left their brains severely damaged and yet survived. Perhaps one of the most notable was the case of Phineas Gage, who suffered a terrible accident on the 13th of September 1848. He was working as a navvy for a railway company when, on the fateful day, he was preparing to blast a rock. In accordance with the procedures of the time, he was filling a hole in the rock with gunpowder using a 1.1 meter long and 3.2 centimeters in diameter wrought iron when the gunpowder suddenly exploded. The wrought iron practically flew out of the hole like a bullet and passed effortlessly through the head of the young man, who was 25 years old at the time. The 6-kilogram iron rod had penetrated through his skull with such force that it was found 25 meters from the scene of the accident. Unbelievably, within minutes, Gage was able to talk and, with a little help, walk. Although he received professional and, given the circumstances, rapid care, the pressure that hit his brain left him in a semi-comatose state on the 23rd of September, and he remained in this state until the 3rd of October. 4 days later, however, he managed to wake up and take a single step. A month later, he was walking up and down the stairs and around the house, and by mid-November, the pain in his head had gone. Although he survived the accident incredibly well, it changed his personality and behavior so much that his friends said, "He's not Gage anymore." And indeed, the young man was a mere shadow of his former self. From a kind, punctual, precise, and attentive man, he had become an undisciplined, obscene, inattentive, aggressive, and perverse figure. Dr. John Martin Harlow, the American doctor who published Gage's case, believed that the frontal lobe, damaged by the accident, was responsible for the higher control of emotions, which had an inhibitory effect on aggressiveness. Gage lived for 12 years after the accident. Carlos Rodriguez was physically and mentally a very ordinary boy, but when he got into bad company at the age of 12, little did he know that 2 years later he would be a medical history maker. By the age of 14, alcohol and drugs had been part of his daily routine, and on one drugged-up day, he stole a car and was involved in a serious accident. He was thrown through the windscreen and hit his head on the tarmac so hard that a significant part of his skull and brain had to be removed. Most amazingly, after his recovery, he retained all his memory and mental faculties. His behavior remained unchanged, and he was still able to communicate intelligently and answer questions quickly. Scientists still have no clear explanation for how this is possible in such a severely damaged brain. There are, of course, many other examples in medical science of people with whole brain or part brain deficiencies. So, if you know of any other such cases, please be sure to write them down in the comments, or write down what you think about them. Don't forget to check out my previous videos because you'll find more interesting stuff here, or just like the content to let me know if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to be notified of my future uploads. Thank you very much for your attention. See you in next video.